wanna stay ahead of the curve, then follow my words. All we doing, teach, train, innovate, solve, yeah. Teach, train, innovate, solve. If you wanna be ahead of the curve, then follow my words.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to TExES, where we build confident, empowered educators through empathy and strategy, giving you practical tools that you can use today. I'm Tamara Gibson, the CEO of TT Innovative Solutions. I'm a former Title I classroom teacher, a trainer, and a coach. With over 20 years of experience supporting new educators and classroom teachers to make informed instructional decisions. And tonight, I want to share with you some information about when your behavior data plateaus. What do you do? That's my goal for this evening. I'm going to be very ambitious about getting through our information and sharing with you. On one lens, those of you who are preparing for SPED 186, and then on the other lens, those that are already in the classroom and are needing some support. I want you to imagine that 4 weeks ago, you wrote a behavior intervention plan, which I'm going to mention quite a bit tonight as a BIP, for a student. You've been collecting data ever since that day. And then this week, when you look at the graph, it's flat. Same frequency of outbursts as week 1. And here's the question that separates most data-driven teachers from the teachers who don't make the connection. Is this flat data a failure, or is it information? If your gut answer was, I need to try something new, I want you to pause right there, because that instinct, which is jumping to a new strategy, is exactly the trap that the exam builds into this competency. And tonight, I want to show you why, and I'm going to give you the actual thinking sequence before you run and touch that BIP at all. So by the end of this video, I want you to know that the vocabulary terms that we throw out there, and I'm going to use this evening, FBA, BIP, and ABC data, you'll know how to think through those problems on the exam around behavior. And more importantly than that, you're going to know what to do when it's your own data that plateaus. And so what our essential thoughts, our whole gamut for tonight is going to be to cover behavioral plan progress monitoring, your understanding around it, this chain that I'm going to talk to you about in regards to FBA and BIP. I'm going to return back to that 4-week plateau that I just mentioned. Give those of you that are practicing for SPED 186 a couple of scenarios, and then talk about some common mistakes that we see. I always like to talk about the why behind things, because the why is important for understanding the concepts. The truth is that academic progress monitoring gets a whole lot of airtime in SPED prep programs. Things like reading fluency and math fact fluency, and even IEP goal graphs. They're there. But behavior progress monitoring, it gets treated like an afterthought. But on this exam and in life, particularly this exam competency 7, they're explicit. They're telling you that you are expected to know if the key concepts and purposes of a functional behavioral assessment and a behavior intervention plan are unique, and how they are, you're expected to be able to monitor the effectiveness of a behavior intervention plan. Well, how do you do that? Through progress monitoring data, and it's going to be defined by the BIP information that they give you. You're essentially going to have to evaluate the effects of that intervention. That is not a definition question. That's a reasoning question. It follows the framework that I talk to you all the time about. Knowing the data, analyzing it, understanding it, getting a clear understanding of it, knowing what the need is. Sometimes they tell you explicitly what the need is, and sometimes they give you inferencing, ask for your inferencing skills to be put into place. And then finally, what action should I take from said data? You see, they're going to give you this data, then they're going to ask you to decide, and you have to make a defensible decision that makes sense according to what they give you. And this has real world stakes to it, because this is not just an exam skill that they're building. It really is a skill for a classroom, because if we do this wrong in your classroom, one or two things happen. Either you're going to abandon an intervention that was actually starting to work, because 4 weeks sometimes feels like forever and you panic. Or the second is you're going to keep running an intervention that's clearly not working because nobody has set a decision rule up front. Both of those failures, they show up in ARD meetings, and both of those failures, they show up in due process complaints. This is a real skill. This is not a trivial category that you can ignore. And I also want to mention the importance of it in domain number 3, because domain number 3 covers 27% of this exam. So again, what do I want you to remember from this section? They don't want just to know if you know what a BIP is. They're testing whether or not you know what to do with the data a BIP generates. And as I stated just a little bit ago, most of the test preps, they're treated as separate vocabulary, like they're not connected. Oh, they're not separated. These two links are links in a chain. And the exam expects you to know the whole chain. So the sequence that you see on my screen right now is part of it. And in FBA, I'm going to be able to understand and see how it's affecting the instruction. I want to understand how to write this BIP. I've got to get the data in order to decipher what the actual function is happening in the FBA. And I'm going to take that FBA's data to write this BIP, this plan. And it's going to be followed by progress monitoring. And then I may need to make some instructional adjustments to this behavioral plan. I'm going to do that as needed. So again, tonight, I want to walk you through each of these chains, some more lengthier than others, but I want to make certain that you understand that before we start talking about what to do when it plateaus, when it's not making the movements and it's not giving you what you need for it to do for you. And the first is about the FBA. Well, FBA, again, is a functional behavior assessment. I talk explicitly about it in one of the videos that I'll be sure to link somewhere above. Well, the FBA answers one question, and that is, why is this behavior happening? It's not what is the student doing. We already know what they're doing, but rather the function is the focus. Is the behavior getting the student's attention? Are they looking to get your attention in some way or someone else's attention? That's the essential question that we're going to be asking. Is it letting them escape a task? Because according to TA, there's two reasons. It's either they're trying to get something they want or they're trying to escape something they don't want to do. Then I also like to use two other clarifying questions. And that is it giving them access to something tangible? And my other one, maybe it's providing sensory input. Every credible BIP will trace back to the hypothesis that you stated in the function that was identified in the FBA. And if you skip this step, you'll be writing a behavior plan based only on what the behavior looks like, rather than what's actually happening. And that, my dears, is a plan built on sinking sand. The BIP itself is talking about the function. Now I'm going to take this function. Well, it's not talking about the function. Let me correct that. The BIP is taking this function to become a plan. So I've got my FBA that tells me the reason why the child is either trying to escape or they're trying to get something. Then I take this information and I place it in this BIP. If it's a well-written BIP, it's going to include a couple of different things. Number one, the target behavior is defined, clearly defined. It's observable, it's measurable, terms are stated within this BIP. And whatever hypothesis that we came up as a function from the FBA is going to be there. I should place in some proactive strategies, that being, how am I going to prevent this behavior from being needed at all? Replacement behavior, which I'm teaching some kind of equivalent, functional equivalent from the behavior itself. And what I mean by that is, say a student is yelling to escape a task. Instead, I want them to learn to raise their hand and request a break. And then after that portion, I want to reinforce this procedure. So in essence, it's really what I like to say, a repetition, a cycle. I want to make sure that I am doing my part with the proactive strategy that we chose to make sure that they understand the replacement behavior and they're going to utilize it, and then I'm reinforcing this. So the BIP also specifies how the progress will be measured. And this is where many people skip when they're studying. And I don't want you to be one of those people. It's the part of competency 7 that I see tested most often. And then I want to drag us a little bit deeper before I talk about that so much. And that's going into the progress monitoring. When we're talking about progress monitoring data, I'm not saying, oh, I'm going to check on it, see how it's going. No, I'm looking for the specific planned collection of data on the dimensions that I listed in the BIP, according to the behavior that we identified. Plainly stated, I want to measure the way the BIP said that it would be measured. And I want the frequency of the BIP that we said that it was going to be measured on. That's exactly what we're looking to do. And then the last part is only if needed. I want to make sure that the instructional and behavior adjustments are put into play. This is the decision point. This is where I believe that a lot of people leave some points on the table. And honestly, some of those that are practicing teachers, they kind of go wrong. Because if we eyeball the data instead of applying a decision rule, to me, that's a failure. And what do I mean by decision rule? Well, it means that it's a rule of thumb that you've committed to in advance, and it should be expressly written in the BIP. Because a BIP that just says I'm going to monitor progress and I'm going to adjust as needed, that's not a decision rule. But one that says if frequency does not increase by, say, a percentage, say 20% over a period of time, 3 consecutive weeks of accurately implementing a session, then the team will review the data to reassess the function. That's a really good way. I know how it's going to be done. I know what to do, and I know when to look back at it again. So I want you to think about your classroom. Did you or do you have a student that has a BIP? And can you say, if I asked you right now, what data points would trigger you to change that plan? If you can't answer that within a few seconds of me asking you, That's the gap that I want to close tonight. Because a BIP without a clear, defined data plan isn't a complete BIP. The exam and the art committee will expect you to name what you're measuring, how often, not just say we're going to keep an eye on it, because keeping an eye on it is not going to solve the problem, and it's out of compliance with what IDEA says that we have to do. So what data am I going to collect? I'm going to answer that question of what and how often. If I'm looking, it's always going to depend on the behavior. And you are going to be expected to articulate why a given measure fits a given behavior. So I placed up on your screen a couple of ways that we can record it, i.e. a couple of ways that you can collect your data. So frequency and event recording. This one is how many times the behavior occurs. Best use for this one is when there's a clear beginning of the behavior and an ending. Things like a student calling out, leaving their seat, or throwing material. There's a clear beginning and there's a clear end. Duration recording is a little different. It says how long does the behavior last. This, to me, best defines or best use of this one is for behavior that persists over a long period of time. It could be a student having a tantrum. It could be that the student refuses to do work. That's a good use for duration recording. And then latency recording. How long does it take the student to actually begin a behavior from your prompt? This is useful in conjunction with things like compliance and task initiation goals. Intensity rating. Intensity itself implies that there's some kind of scale, and that's exactly what this is. We're going to be capturing the severity of it, often used alongside frequency of the behavior for things like aggression, where how hard actually matters as well as how often. These two go together. And off to the side, I placed out what I'm going to be referring to as ABC data. That's antecedent, behavior, and consequence. For this one, it deserves its own moment by itself for clarity. So an antecedent is what happens right before said behavior. And then a consequence, and we don't usually use that term very much in the study guide, is what happens right after. But ABC data isn't just a tally. It's your ongoing check that what you said was the function, what you hypothesized would happen, or is the reason from the FBA still holds up. How often should it be collected? Well, that answer is found in your BIP as well. It should specify the schedule, and that schedule should match the behavior's occurrence pattern. And it shouldn't be some arbitrary calendar kind of event where you're just kind of marking subjectively. No, a behavior that happens multiple times a day needs daily data. A low frequency one, but a high intensity behavior might be tracked per incident. And then we'll do a weekly review of the pattern. But what SPED 186 is checking here is whether you understand the data collection frequency as a design decision tied to the behavior. Because not one size fits all here. I know that sometimes we get forms and those forms try to fit all of it, but this is not that case here. We've got to be able to know when to use what and how to use it. And just as important as the other things that I've stated so far is a review cycle. And this is where it points are often lost. Because if I'm collecting data daily, but I never analyze it, it's the same as not collecting data at all. Best practice is that you set a review interval, and some common practices are weekly, bi-weekly, and then, of course, it depends on the severity. All of these things are factors that they're going to give you. That's why it's important for you to recognize the data that they're giving you and the need that is going to be identified. So where the data is graphed or charted, you're going to look for trend lines, not the isolated days. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit later in our conversation about that. Let's try predicting your answer. So if a student's target behavior is verbal outbursts that occur, let's say between 8 to 10 times a day, would you review this data daily, weekly, or monthly? And yes, I do want you to say your answer out loud before I share. Well, you'd still want to at least a weekly trend review, even with the daily data collection, because a single day tells you almost nothing. One bad day could be a substitute teacher coming in to cover for you, or a schedule change, or even if the child skipped breakfast. But a week worth of data starts to tell you or paint a real picture, a real story for you to look at. And what decisions do I get made from this data? That's the heart of this competency that I'm talking about, and it's also the heart of our conversation here about data, period. Once you have a trend, not a single data point, but a trend, you're choosing between 3 pathways. And those pathways are going to be meaningful about how things are connected. So the first pathway is whether you continue. If the data shows improvement, an increasing trend in the replacement behavior, a decrease in the trend in the targeted behavior that we're trying to stop, you're going to stay the course. If the other is to adjust, it is when the data is if the data is flat or shows minimal movement over a meaningful period of time. Okay, so you got to decide that window. But something about the implementation, the reinforcement value, or the environmental variables need to change. But you don't immediately necessarily have to throw out the whole plan. We're just going to adjust. And then thirdly is the redesign. It's unfortunately the one that many people jump to when things don't seem like they're working. But you only need to redesign when the data shows that the behavior is worsening, or the ABC data that I'm going to talk more about with you reveals that our original hypothesized function from the FBA, it was wrong. This is when you go back to the FBA, not just to adjust, not just the BIP. So what should you remember from this section? I want you to remember that the exam rewards those who can match the method to the behavior, or who understand the data-based decisions require a trend and not a snapshot. Remember, we want the whole picture to understand the entire story. So let's return back to our 4-week discussion of that 4-week plateau that I started to talk to you at the beginning. Your students' behavior data has plateaued for 4 weeks. That's what we talked about. And I want to walk you through this in the way that you need to think about it when it comes to constructive responses, or the way that you might see it in real life, where you're sitting across a parent that's saying, why is nothing seeming to have changed? Well, I want you to take a deep breath. Don't touch that BIP yet. The instinct, as I said before, is to redesign immediately, and I want you to resist that. Instead, I want us to review a few key steps before we do that, before we head that direction. And the first question is, what is the data actually telling me? After I've really looked at that, analyzed it, made sure that I understand and interpret it correctly. Then I want to look at the fidelity behind it. I need to check to make sure that the plan was actually put in place. This to me is one of the single most under-tested ideas in behavior prep, but it's a favorite when you're talking to an art facilitator. And it's for a reason. Because before you can conclude that an intervention doesn't work, you have to confirm that it's actually implemented the way it was written. Some key questions are, was the replacement behavior taught explicitly, or was it assumed? Was reinforcement delivered every time or only when it seemed to be convenient? Then I have to ask, was the proactive strategy actually helping? Or was it a quietly disappeared after week one? Maybe the translation of how it was supposed to be implemented with, say, a paraprofessional wasn't clearly defined, or maybe they weren't briefed and it wasn't put in place. So a flat data trend after inconsistent implementation isn't evidence that the plan failed. It is evidence that the plan was never tested. And that's what we have to make sure that we're assured of. And I want to put this in example form so that it makes sense. So a fourth grade teacher, they're implementing a BIP where the student earns a token every 15 minutes that they have on task behavior. So 4 weeks in, no improvement. But when you go to check in with the teacher, you learn that the token board was never used during math. It was only used in reading. And the other 5 class periods where the behavior actually occurs most, they didn't utilize it. So the plan never really failed, but it never fully was run. That's a problem. So then we go on to step 3. If fidelity is solid, we want to look at the function again. We want to pull the ABC data from the plateau period. And antecedent is still the same one as identified in the FBA. That's the question you want to ask yourself. Or is the consequence, even a well-intentioned one built into the BIP, did it become an escape or a reinforcement of the original behavior? What does that look like? Sometimes we build in certain strategies. I'll use calm down corner as an example. It was meant to be a proactive strategy, but it then becomes an escape route for the student. And then the behavior plateaus because it's still functionally working for the student. They wanted to escape. So it becomes the side door trap that allows them to continue. And it's not helping them nor us. So what would you need to see in the ABC data to know whether or not this calm down corner is helping or if it's accidentally reinforcing the escape route? I want you to think about that. And then I want to move on to the fourth part, because here you have to make a decision and you have to name your reasoning. All of these steps that I've mentioned thus far are keys within us understanding if the plan is actually working. So if fidelity was solid, the functional analysis still holds up. The adjustment is usually about intensity and not direction. We'll probably have to increase the reinforcement. We'll have to shorten the intervals and then maybe add a visual cue. And if the function analysis reveals something new, and we go back to the FBA process, this again is how we figure out what works. So potentially this art committee, when we go back and talk to them, they're going to ask us those questions, and we have to be able to know whether or not we're treating the right function. And we're not just kind of spinning our wheels. And this is where competency number 9's language shows up in the real world. So even though we're not focused on it today, I want you to know that you are responsible for advocating for your students. And you're going to bring this analysis to those art committees, saying whether or not it's working. If it's working, great. If it's not working, we want to make a better plan. And from this section, the key that I want you to know is that a plateau is not automatically a failed plan. Rather, it's a prompt to check implementation. Fidelity first, function second, and intensity third. And yes, in that order. So let's apply the concepts that we have under SPED 186 exam conditions, because some of you are here for that. And I want to make sure that not only do I present what it will look like in the real world, but in test format as well. So our practice scenario number 1 states that a special education teacher has been implementing a BIP for a student whose target behavior is eloping from the classroom. Data collection over 4 weeks shows no change in frequency. The teacher confirms that the proactive strategies, replacement behavior instruction, and the reinforcement schedule outlined in the BIP have all been implemented consistently as written. So which of the following should the teacher do next? I'm going to ask you some sort of question around that. Is it A, discontinue the BIP and return the student to general classroom management without a formal plan? Or B, review ABC data collected during the plateau period to determine whether the original hypothesized function or the behavior still holds? Or maybe it's C, increase the frequency of data collection from daily to hourly to obtain more precise measurements. And then finally, D, request the student be reevaluated for a different disability eligibility category. I'm going to give you a moment to think about what answer that you would choose. Well, I hope that you chose B, because Fidelity has already been confirmed in the data that they gave us in the question. The next diagnostic step is to re-examine the function, not to abandon the plan. See, the exam is actually, in this question, they're actually assessing whether you understand the diagnostic sequence, the fidelity, the function, and then the authenticity. And don't skip straight to redesigning or discontinuing the plan altogether. A teacher is monitoring a student's BIP, which specifies daily frequency counts of calling out behavior with a weekly trend review. In week number 2, the student's frequency count is unusually high on a single day due to a fire drill disrupting the schedule. How should the teacher treat this data point when conducting the weekly review? Should they A, exclude the day entirely from all future data records since the fire drill was an unusual event? B, weigh the day's data more heavily than the other days since disruption reveals how the student handles stress? C, include the data point but interpret it in a context as part of the overall weekly trend rather than treating it in isolation? Or D, pause data collection until the schedule returns to a fully typical routine? I'll give you another moment again. I hope that you chose C, because data-based decision-making means using complete, honest data interpreted in context, not discarding inconvenient data points. That's not what we're doing here. And this question is testing whether you understand that the single data point is never the unit of decision-making. I'm not going off of just one data point, but I'm going off the trend. And the context does matter. So this exam, as I said before, it rewards responses that treat data as a trend. You have to interpret this data. It's not a checklist to be completed or a threshold that is just going to be hit, but it falls in line with our framework. Understanding my data, recognizing the need, and choosing the correct answer that follows in line with appropriate action to address the question. That's how you do it. And before we get to the end or the close summation of our conversation today, I want to interject a couple of mistakes that are common. The first one is treating a flat data trend as an automatic signal to redesign the BIP. We covered the why, fidelity first, and then function second. But they're not going to necessarily put this in words. They're going to put this in graphs and charts that they're going to give you. And you have to interpret these graphs and charts correctly. The second mistake is choosing a data collection method that doesn't fit the behavior. The frequency counts on a behavior that's really about duration. They have to connect. If you joined our school community, I'm going to be covering 3 more mistakes that I think will be helpful for you to understand how to recognize potential errors and avoid them, because naming them out loud helps you to stop making these mistakes and errors as you're going through the exam and as you're in your own classroom. I want to close out our discussion by returning back to the sequence. Because here's the true journey. I want to be able to make sure that instruction is happening appropriately for this student and the students that they're sharing the classroom with. I want to reduce their frustration and my own. I want to collect data accordingly with fidelity. And I want to make sure that as I progress monitor, I understand what's happening along the way. And finally, but one of the more important pieces, I want to make adjustments as necessary. So when your data plateaus in your classroom or even on this exam, in the various forms that I told you they're going to present it to you, don't ask, what should I change? But rather ask, 1, was it implemented with fidelity? 2, does the function still hold? And only if you can say yes to both of those do you probe a little further by saying, what's the smallest, most targeted adjustment that makes sense? Because usually it lies somewhere there. This sequence is what separates a teacher who reacts to the data from a teacher that reasons with it. And that's the exact reason and decision making that we're trying to produce with you here at TExES. We want to help you to become a special education specialist, ensuring that you are prepared to think through not only the exam, but situations that happen in your everyday classroom life. And if this way of thinking, the sequence over snapshot, this reasoning over reaction, is what you've been missing from your exam prep, that's exactly what we build inside of our SPED 186 cohort. We have lots of options available to you. I want to highlight this one tonight because we don't just hand you flashcards. We walk you through and help you to understand the reasoning chain behind the competencies, the same way we just did here today, until it becomes automatic to you and you'll use it in your everyday life. If you're ready and you're prepared to join that cohort, we start another one on August the 4th. We meet Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. and Saturdays at 9 a.m., supporting you as you prepare for your state exam. I'm going to drop a couple of different things that can help you in regards to behavior and understanding the sequence of it all within the show notes. But I also want to just express my thanks for all of those that have been commenting on the videos sharing that you have passed and you have been watching our station to help you to get there. We have lots of opportunities in which you can join in with us, but the best and most efficient way for you to get in our sequence of understanding, or shall I say into our world, is by joining our mailing list. We look forward to interacting with you, and as always, I'm thankful for you arriving here at our station. I know that you are looking forward to passing your state exam. You're doing the work without credentials, and I want to help you get the credentials to match the work that you're doing. I want to help you to close the gap and crush your goal this year in 2026. We still got time. We still have the ability to do so. And as always, I thank you for watching tonight. I'll see you again real soon. Bye, everyone.